The laughter hit first sharp, loud, and deliberate. I was standing near the edge of the backyard, holding a paper plate I hadn't touched, when my Aunt Gloria's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Useless. That's what she is, she said, loud enough for the whole backyard to hear. Always has been. Half the guests turned to look at me. Some smiled awkwardly. Others just stared, waiting to see what I would do next. My brother Kevin raised his drink slowly, a grin spreading across his face. To the family disappointment, he said, like he was giving a toast at a wedding. People laughed. Even my mother, Pamela, standing just a few feet away, said nothing. She stared at the grass instead of looking at me. My throat tightened. My face grew hot. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything, just to make the moment stop. But before a single word could leave my lips, a calm, steady voice came from behind the crowd. I don't think any of you understand who you're talking about. My name is Haley Vance. And that was the moment everything changed. I had always been the one they talked about instead of two. Growing up in the Vance household meant learning quickly where you stood. My older brother Kevin was the star, athletic, loud, and full of the kind of confidence that made adults nod and smile whenever he walked into a room. My mother lit up around him the way she never did with me. I was different. I was quiet, curious, and interested in things nobody in my family understood. Design, storytelling, building ideas from nothing. Instead of encouraging me, they treated those interests like hobbies I would eventually grow out of. You need something real, my mother used to say. Something stable. Something people can actually see. What she meant was something like Kevin. Something safe and visible and easy to brag about at family dinners. I never got a scholarship celebration. No toast for my small wins. When I graduated with a degree in communications, my father, before he passed, was the only one who clapped with any real feeling. Everyone else just waited to see when I would fail. And I could feel that waiting every single time we were in the same room together. The cruelty was never big or dramatic. It was small and steady, like water wearing down stone. There was the Christmas dinner when I was 22, the year I had just landed my first real freelance client. I mentioned it at the table, proud of myself in a quiet way. Gloria immediately turned to Kevin and asked how his job was going. Nobody followed up on what I had said. Not one person. There was the birthday when my mother bought Kevin a new laptop because he needed it for work, and handed me a gift card to a grocery store. Not as a joke. As a real gift. I smiled and said thank you. There were the family group chats where everyone reacted to Kevin's photos with strings of heart emojis and exclamation points. My updates got a single thumbs up if I was lucky. My cousin Amber was the worst. She had a talent for wrapping insults inside questions. So are you still doing that little internet thing? She would ask, with a smile that never reached her eyes. I learned to stop sharing. I learned to keep my life to myself. It was easier than watching them not care. 2 weeks before the barbecue, I drove to my mother's house to drop off something she had asked for. I should have known better than to stay longer than 5 minutes. She started the way she always did. A slow build-up dressed as concern. I ran into Carol next door, she said, not looking up from the dishes. Her daughter just got promoted. Manager at that insurance company downtown. She paused. Carol's daughter is younger than you know. I told her things were going well for me. I told her I was working on something important. Haley, she said, finally turning to face me and drying her hands on a dish towel. I say this because I love you. I don't think this path you're on is going anywhere. At some point, you have to stop chasing dreams and start living in the real world. Something inside me went very still. I'm doing fine, Mom, I said quietly. You're not fine, she replied. You never want to hear the truth. That's always been your problem. I left without finishing the conversation. But her words stayed with me the whole drive home, sitting heavy in my chest like a stone I couldn't put down. I asked myself at least a dozen times why I decided to go to that barbecue. The invitation had come through the family group chat, Gloria's annual summer gathering, the one that happened every July at her house on Prescott Lane. I had skipped the last 2 years with easy excuses. Work trips, prior commitments, a bad cold. Each time nobody asked twice. That alone said everything. But something in me that Saturday morning decided to try again. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was that quiet, foolish hope that families can change, that enough time passing actually heals something. I told myself it would be different this time. I was in a better place. I was stronger. I could handle an afternoon with them without it pulling me under. I got dressed carefully. I chose something neat and simple. I picked up a dessert from the bakery on my way because that was the kind of thing I still tried even when they didn't. I pulled up to Gloria's house, heard the music drifting over the fence, and sat in my car for almost 3 full minutes before opening the door. I should have driven home. Gloria's backyard was exactly what it always was. Crowded, loud, and full of people performing happiness. There were long folding tables covered in foil trays, coolers packed with drinks, and children running in circles near the back fence. My aunt moved through her guests like she was royalty at her own gathering, hugging the ones she liked and air-kissing the rest. Kevin was already there when I arrived, holding court near the grill with 2 friends from high school. He saw me come through the back gate and gave a small nod. Not a wave, just a nod, before turning back to his conversation. Amber caught my eye from across the yard and smiled that smile of hers. I smiled back and looked away quickly. I found a spot near the edge of the yard, close enough to seem present but far enough to have room to breathe. I made small talk with a couple of neighbors I half recognized. I ate a little. I kept my phone in my pocket even though I wanted to stare at it. Nobody came over to talk to me. Not my mother. Not my brother. Not one person that afternoon made me feel like they were glad I had come. It was Amber who started it, though I knew it would be. She made her way over to me about an hour into the gathering, carrying a red cup and wearing the expression of someone who had already decided how the conversation was going to go. "Haley," she said brightly, "I feel like I never know what you're up to these days. What are you doing with yourself?" I told her I was working in brand strategy. I kept it simple. "Brand strategy," she repeated, drawing the words out slowly. "Is that like making logos and stuff?" "It's a bit more than that," I said. "Are you at a company? Or still just doing freelance things?" The word freelance came out the way people say the word hobby. "I work with a company," I said. "We've been growing pretty fast." She tilted her head. "But like, do you have a real salary? Benefits? A retirement account?" She laughed like she was joking. She was not joking. Before I could answer, Kevin appeared beside her, drink in hand. I hadn't noticed him drifting over. I didn't know he had been listening. Something in his eyes told me whatever was coming next wasn't going to be kind. Kevin cleared his throat loudly, pulling the attention of everyone nearby. "Hey, can I get everyone's attention for just a second?" he called out. He had the kind of voice that filled a yard easily. People turned. The music lowered. Conversations paused mid-sentence. "I just want to take a moment," he said, grinning, "to honor my little sister Haley." He gestured toward me like I was a prop in his act. Still out here doing her little online thing. Still figuring it all out. He tilted his cup in my direction. "To the family's most ambitious dreamer." He paused just long enough for the joke to land. Then Gloria from across the yard called out clearly, "Useless, Kevin. The word you're looking for is useless." People laughed. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to fill the whole backyard with the sound of it. "To the family disappointment," Kevin added, raising his drink higher. More laughter followed. Someone clapped. One of his friends whistled from behind the grill. I stood completely still, the paper plate in my hand, the food on it long gone cold. My face felt like it was on fire. Every part of me wanted to sink into the ground. That word, useless, drifted through the summer air like smoke. I looked around the yard slowly, giving anyone, a chance to step forward. My mother was standing near the drinks table. She had heard everything. I could tell by the way her shoulders stiffened when the laughter started. But she did not move. She did not speak. She picked up her cup and took a slow sip. Amber looked at the ground. The neighbors I had been talking to earlier found something very interesting to look at on the other side of the yard. Gloria was already moving on to another conversation, laughing at something someone else had said. Kevin stood where he was, still grinning, pleased with himself the way he always was when the whole room was paying attention to him. Not one person said a single word in my defense. Not one. I had been called useless in front of 30 people, and the silence that followed was somehow louder than the laughter had been. Because the laughter said they thought it was funny, but the silence said they thought it was true. I felt something break open quietly inside my chest, not in a dramatic way, but in the way old things finally give out after being pressed on for too long. I was done. I was completely done. I set my paper plate down on the nearest table and turned toward the back gate. I had decided in that moment that I was leaving. I was going to walk to my car, drive home, and never come back to one of these gatherings again. No explanation. No scene. Just gone. I had taken exactly 2 steps when I heard the gate latch click open. A man walked in. He was dressed simply, dark jeans, a clean white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and leather shoes that had no business being at a backyard barbecue. He looked to be in his early 40s, calm and unhurried, like someone who was used to walking into rooms and knowing exactly why he was there. He stood just inside the gate and scanned the yard carefully. When his eyes landed on me, they stopped. He walked directly toward me, not toward the food tables, not toward Gloria, not toward anyone else, and the crowd shifted and parted naturally as he moved through it. Then, in a voice that carried across the yard without him raising it at all, he said, "I don't think any of you understand who you're talking about." The yard went quiet in a completely different way than it had before. Before, it had gone quiet to laugh at me. Now it was quiet because nobody knew what to make of this man or understood why he was here. I recognized him the moment I saw his face clearly. I would have known Preston Ackley anywhere. I had spent the last 2.5 years working beside him, building something I was genuinely proud of, something that had slowly become more real than anything else in my life. But my family had absolutely no idea who he was. I could see it on their faces, the confused smiles, the sideways glances, the way Gloria tilted her head trying to figure out if he was a neighbor or someone's +1 who had walked to the wrong house. Kevin let out a short, uncertain laugh, the kind people produce when they are not sure if something is serious. "Sorry, who are you exactly?" Preston didn't look at Kevin right away. He looked at me first. "You okay?" he asked, quietly enough that only I could fully hear it. I gave a small nod. Then he turned to face the group, composed, unhurried, completely unbothered by 30 strangers staring at him, and said clearly, "My name is Preston Ackley." The name meant nothing to them. I could see that right away. Kevin kept his casual smile going. Gloria folded her arms, waiting to understand what exactly was happening. Amber looked at me with a raised eyebrow, as if she expected me to explain this man's presence in her mother's backyard. "And how do you know Haley?" Gloria asked, using the polite voice she saved for strangers she hadn't decided whether to trust yet. "She's the head of brand strategy at my company," Preston said. "Has been for 2.5 years. I came because we've been trying to reach her all afternoon. Her phone is dead, and the matter couldn't wait until Monday." Kevin let out a short laugh. "Brand strategy," he repeated, the same way Amber had said it an hour before. "Right." Preston looked at him calmly. "You think that's funny?" Kevin shrugged loosely. "No offense, man, but we're kind of in the middle of a family thing here." "I understand that," Preston said. "I just want to make sure everyone here is clear on what Haley actually does for a living." He paused, letting that sit. "Because based on what I heard walking through that gate, it seems like nobody does." "Our company finalized a deal 3 days ago," Preston said, his voice steady and even. "A national retail partnership, 42 store locations across the country. It's the largest contract we've ever signed." Nobody spoke. "The entire campaign that landed that deal," he continued, "was built by Haley. The brand positioning, the pitch deck, every line of messaging the client responded to, all of it. I have brought in senior consultants with 20 years of experience who could not do what she put together in 6 weeks. I watched my family's faces shift in real time right in front of me. Gloria's folded arms slowly dropped. Amber's raised eyebrow came down. Kevin's smile faded. Not all at once, but in pieces, like a reflection breaking apart on water. My mother hadn't moved from the drinks table, but she was watching now. Really watching. "I drove here personally," Preston added, "because Haley is the reason that contract exists, and I needed her to know before the news goes public on Monday." He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply stating facts the way you do when the facts are loud enough on their own. And in that backyard, surrounded by people who had called me useless just 5 minutes before, those facts were absolutely deafening. While Preston spoke, my mind drifted somewhere else for just a moment. I thought about the first night I stayed in the office until 2 in the morning alone, rebuilding an entire presentation from scratch because the original direction simply wasn't working. I thought about a Saturday I spent 8 hours straight in a coffee shop, testing different messaging angles and filling notebooks with ideas that most people would never see. When I joined Preston's company, a growing brand consultancy called ClearPath, I had been hired as a mid-level strategist. Within 8 months, I had been promoted to head of brand strategy. Not because I asked for it, but because the results made that decision obvious. Over 2.5 years, I led campaigns for 6 different clients. I built a small team of 4 people from the ground up. I traveled to 3 different cities for client meetings and took every challenge that landed on my desk without complaint. I had loved every difficult, exhausting, rewarding moment of it. The work made sense to me in a way that very little else ever had. But I had never told my family a single word of it. Not one. Because every time I had tried to share something real with them, they had found a way to make me feel small. People often ask why I kept it all secret. The honest answer is simple. I had learned over many years that sharing good news with my family didn't feel good. It felt like handing something precious to people who didn't know how to hold it carefully. When I was 24, I won a regional design award for a project I had worked on for 3 solid months. I mentioned it to my mother on the phone. Her response was, "That's nice. Have you thought about applying to the county office? They have steady hours and good benefits." When I received my first promotion at the job before ClearPath, Kevin's response was to tell me about his friend who had just made 6 figures in sales. "Now that's where the real money is," he said. After enough of those moments, you stop sharing. Not because you're ashamed of what you're doing, but because protecting your own joy quietly becomes more important than chasing their approval loudly. I had built something real at ClearPath, something that genuinely mattered. For 2.5 years that had been mine completely, untouched by their opinions, undamaged by their indifference. I didn't need them to believe in it. It was real whether they believed in it or not. The shift in the yard happened fast. One moment people had been laughing. The next, they were straightening up, adjusting their expressions, and finding quiet reasons to drift a little closer to where I was standing. Gloria spoke first. "Well," she said, in a completely different tone than the one she had been using all afternoon, "we always knew Haley was talented." She smiled at me, wide and warm, like she hadn't just called me useless in front of 30 people 6 minutes ago. I said nothing. Amber materialized at my side almost immediately. "Oh my gosh, Haley, you should have told us. A national deal? That's incredible." She touched my arm like we were close friends who talked every week. "I always knew you were doing something big." Kevin set his drink down. His whole posture had changed, the loose confidence gone, replaced by something careful and stiff. "Hey, I was just messing around earlier," he said. "You know how I am." I looked at each of them in turn. These were the same people who, less than 10 minutes ago, had laughed at me publicly and said nothing in my defense. Now they were smiling, complimenting, leaning in close. Not because anything about me had changed, because something about my usefulness to them suddenly had. My mother crossed the yard slowly, weaving through the guests until she reached me. She looked at Preston first, then at me, then back at Preston with a warm smile she had clearly been rehearsing on the walkover. "I'm Pamela," she said, extending her hand toward him. "Haley's mother. We are just so proud of her." Preston shook her hand politely and said nothing beyond a small nod. She turned to me then, and the smile softened into something that was working very hard to look like it had always been there. "I didn't know things had gotten this big for you, sweetheart. You really should have told us about all of this." "You never asked," I said. Quietly, calmly. Her smile flickered for just a second. "Well, we're asking now. I'd love to sit down and hear all about it." She placed her hand on my arm, and I felt the familiar pressure of that touch, the kind that said, "Include me, I'm your mother, I deserve to be part of this story." But I heard something underneath her words that I had learned to recognize years ago. Not pride. Not love. Calculation. She was quietly rewriting herself into a story she had played absolutely no part in building. And I was not going to let her do it. Kevin found me near the side of the house about 10 minutes after Preston's announcement, away from most of the other guests. He had his hands in his pockets and the look of someone who had prepared something to say but wasn't entirely confident it would land the way he needed it to. Hey, he started. Look, what I said earlier, the toast thing, that was just a joke. You know I don't actually think that about you. I looked at him steadily. You said it in front of 30 people, Kevin. I was just being funny. Nobody took it seriously. You took it seriously enough to say it, I replied. He rubbed the back of his neck slowly. Come on, Haley, don't be like this. He paused, then lowered his voice. This Preston guy, his company, is there any chance of getting involved somehow? I've been thinking about moving in a new direction, and if you have connections that could open a door. I almost couldn't believe how quickly he had gotten there. Less than 15 minutes had passed since he raised his drink and toasted my failure in front of everyone he knew. And now he was standing here asking me for a favor. I looked at him for a long, quiet moment. No, I said. Simply, clearly, without a trace of anger. Then I walked away. While I had been managing my family's sudden change of heart, Preston had stayed nearby, not hovering, just present and steady. At one point, one of Gloria's neighbors, a man named Frank who ran a local business, struck up a conversation with him. I caught pieces of it from a few feet away. Frank had clearly searched the name ClearPath on his phone and was now reading with wide eyes. Says here you just closed a deal worth nearly $4 million, Frank said, looking up slowly. Preston nodded simply. The announcement goes live Monday morning. Frank looked at me, then at Preston, then back at me again. And she built the campaign that closed it? She built the brand foundation that made this company worth investing in, Preston said. We wouldn't have had the investor conversations we had last year without the strategic work she created in her first year. I had heard Preston speak about my work before, in meetings and client presentations, but hearing it in my aunt's backyard, surrounded by people who had just laughed at me, landed in a completely different way. It didn't make me feel triumphant. It made me feel tired. Not the tired that comes from weakness. The tired that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time, and finally being allowed to set it down. It was Gloria who pulled me aside. She caught me near the back door of her house, where I had gone to get a glass of water. She slid the screen door closed behind us, cutting off the noise of the yard, and turned to face me with an expression I had never quite seen on her before. Something caught between embarrassment and desperation. Haley, she started, folding and unfolding her hands. I owe you an apology. What I said out there was completely unnecessary. I was just, she paused, searching carefully for the right word. It was a joke. A bad one. I'm sorry. I nodded once. Okay. She looked relieved, too quickly, as if she believed that was the whole transaction. Good. So we're okay. She reached out and touched my shoulder. Because I've actually been thinking lately, my son Eddie has been struggling to find his footing with marketing jobs, and with your connections now, maybe you could put in a word somewhere for him. I removed her hand from my shoulder gently but clearly. Gloria, I said. The apology was a good start. I looked at her directly. But no. I won't be doing that. She blinked. I just thought. I know exactly what you thought, I said. I went back into the yard and stood in the middle of it. Not near the edge this time. Not making myself small and easy to overlook. I stood where people could see me, and I waited until the loudest conversations around me had settled into a quieter hum. Then I spoke. I want to say something, I said, clearly enough for the people nearby to hear. A small group gathered: my mother, Kevin, Gloria, Amber, and a few others who drifted over. I've spent years coming to these gatherings and leaving feeling like I was less than nothing, I said. My voice stayed steady. I've had my work laughed at, my choices questioned, and my worth decided by people who never once bothered to ask what I was actually doing with my life. Nobody interrupted. I'm not angry, I continued. I want to be clear about that. But I need to be honest with you the way none of you have ever been honest with me. I looked at each of them slowly and carefully. What happened today, the toast, the laughter, the silence from the people who were supposed to stand up for me, I won't forget that. And I won't pretend it didn't happen just because my situation now looks more impressive to you than it did this morning. Kevin spoke up first. Haley, come on. We weren't trying to hurt you. That's just how our family jokes around with each other. It's not a joke if only one person is laughing, I said. You're being too sensitive, Gloria added quickly. We've always been like this. It's just how we show love in this family. It isn't love, I said. Amber stepped in. I think you're reading too much into everything. We're your family. We've always rooted for you, even if we didn't always show it the right way. I looked at her steadily. You asked me if I had a real salary less than an hour ago. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. My mother stepped forward, her voice soft and careful. Haley, sweetheart, let's not do this here in front of everyone. We can talk privately and sort through all of this properly. Today just got a little out of hand. Nobody meant anything by it. That word stopped me for a second. Nobody. As if Gloria's voice had spoken all on its own. As if Kevin's hand had raised that drink without any help. As if 30 years of being the family's quiet target had simply happened by accident and belonged to nobody at all. I hear you, I said evenly. But I don't agree. I'm not doing this anymore, I said. No yelling. No tears. No dramatic exit through a slammed door. Just 6 words said plainly and clearly. The way you say something you have rehearsed quietly in your heart for years, and are finally completely ready to let go of. I'm not going to keep showing up and hoping things will be different. I'm not going to keep swallowing how I feel just to keep the peace. And I'm not going to act like today was fine simply because my life suddenly looks more valuable to you than it did this morning. My mother's face tightened. You're going to throw away your whole family over one bad afternoon? I'm not throwing anyone away, I said quietly. I'm just choosing not to let anyone treat me the way I've been treated today, or the way I've been treated for the last 30 years, and call that treatment love. The yard was completely still around me. You are all welcome in my life, I continued. But not under those conditions. Not for the wrong reasons. And not until something actually genuinely changes, not just because I've become useful to you now. I let those words settle over the yard like the last note of a song. Then I reached down and picked up my bag from the chair where I had left it hours ago. Preston was waiting near the gate when I walked toward it. He had heard everything. I could tell by the quiet respect on his face. Not pity, not awkwardness, just the simple acknowledgement of someone who has watched you handle something very hard, and knows you handled it exactly right. Behind me, I could hear the yard trying to reassemble itself. Gloria was saying something to someone in a low, tight voice. Kevin had gone completely silent in the careful way he always did when he was working through something unpleasant. My mother stood where she had been standing, arms folded, wearing an expression I had never quite seen on her face before. Not anger exactly, but something closer to uncertainty. Like a person who has just realized that the ground they thought was solid beneath them was never quite as steady as they believed. She called my name once as I reached the gate. I turned and looked at her fully. We'll talk soon, I said. Not as a promise of forgiveness. Not as a warning. Just a simple, honest fact. Then I unlatched the gate and stepped through it. The world outside Gloria's fence felt immediately different, lighter, cleaner, like stepping out of a room that had been filled with stale air for too many years. I breathed in slowly, and then I kept walking. Preston and I sat in his car at the end of the street for a few minutes before driving anywhere. He walked me through the details about the ClearPath announcement, the timeline, the press piece going live Monday morning, the team celebration plan for that evening. There were decisions to make and things that needed my attention before the week began. But before any of that, he looked at me and simply asked, "You doing okay?" I thought about it honestly before answering. "Yeah," I said. "I actually am. I didn't leave that barbecue with revenge. I left with something quieter and far more permanent, clarity. The kind that doesn't come from proving people wrong, but from finally stopping the exhausting work of needing them to believe you." Preston showing up hadn't turned me into someone new. I had been building, working, and growing for 2.5 years completely on my own, in the quiet without their support or their approval. That value was always there. What changed on that Saturday afternoon was simpler than anything I could have planned for. I stopped carrying them. I had walked into that backyard still hoping, somewhere deep and stubborn inside me, that they would finally choose to see me clearly. I walked out knowing that their choice, whatever they made of it, no longer had any power over mine. I was never useless. I was just surrounded by people who needed me to believe that I was. And I was done believing it.